Hello, this is the video journal for August 29th. I was hoping I would talk a little bit about the two Richard Pryor pieces that we listened to. But first I want to preface with something that I struggle with these particular topics, and most importantly, like the idea and the concept of in-group language. So when referring to the two, or the one title in particular of the Richard Pryor piece, I struggle with whether or not I should be calling it what it's actually titled. I think we know what we're talking about here. It's one of the things that I struggle with because the use of the N-word is definitely not part of my normal vocabulary. But at the same time, I usually fall back on the idea of sort of censorship and ignoring the impact and the history behind the word. I usually think about different schools or agencies trying to ban the book Adventures of Huckleberry Finn because of the use of the word, which I think is wrong, and it ignores the history and everything behind sort of the idea and the concept of the word. So I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and put it all out there, acknowledge that it exists, acknowledge the history behind it, and sort of use it. This is something maybe we can talk about later, sort of discuss if that's something I should be doing or should not be doing, and sort of my thoughts and feelings behind that. So that's aside, let's get on to what I was going to talk about. So listening to the two pieces, we obviously talked about Bicentennial Nigger in class, and I think that one of the most important things we brought up was the idea of race and space and location and time and sort of the context behind it with Bicentennial Nigger. So the idea that this joke, or the beginning of the joke at least, takes place on a slave ship, which we discussed is not funny in any sort of way, by any sense of the word, but it still would be considered that sort of humor. And I think when looking at that and talking about Bicentennial Prayer, which precedes the Bicentennial Nigger track on the album, that's also important to talk about race and space and sort of that whole concept. So listening to Bicentennial Prayer, it's obvious right from the start that it's taking place in sort of a church setting. And through previous classes, obviously, and sort of my own experience, I've come to learn that the idea and sort of the institution of traditionally and historically black churches is an important part within the black community. And they sort of provide that sense of community and sort of support for an underrepresented and a minority population, and sort of that area for people to go to find support in times of struggle, whether it be family issues, other community issues, or racial issues. And I think that's an important part of this sort of set, this sort of track from that album and this particular joke. So if that's the idea that if black community members can go to their churches to sort of seek haven and find that sense of community, and I find it interesting that later on in the track he discusses certain people or certain populations that shouldn't be there. For instance, he talks about the family who brought, I believe the term is water-headed boy. I've never heard of that before. I did look it up, but it sort of means someone with someone who's mentally challenged or in some way. I think I've never heard of that term before. I doubt that it's still in circulation. But and he says that he wouldn't touch the boy, wouldn't acknowledge him or anything. Sort of like take him somewhere else, cover up the problem. He goes on to talk about people with physical handicaps, how they shouldn't be in the church, find somewhere else to go, I think he says, because they're knocking things over and such. I think he rags on the elderly at some point, and people who can't see or talk, can't really remember. But I find that interesting that the traditionally black churches are there for people to go to find that sense of community, and at the same time they're trying to calling out the fact that they should be turning other people away. And so it's sort of presenting that dichotomy between different identities that we talked about in class. So with Bicentennial Nigger, it was black people and Americans, or that sort of black identity and American identity. In Bicentennial Prayer, it's blackness or black identity and other identities such as ability, capacity and stuff like that, mental capacity and sort of that sort of thing, age. So I find it interesting, and it's sort of that same idea that it shouldn't be funny to talk about, but the way he presents it and sort of that thing, he has the crowd roaring, of course. Sort of that. So I think he's drawing upon the fact that of the humor behind that intersectionality that we discussed in class, and sort of that dichotomy that exists between different identities. And I think the fact that he's drawing us to that, he's sort of, I'm interpreting in my own way that sort of like, this is what, say, like the rest of America has done to blacks, so he's drawing out the fact that, like, here are blacks doing it to other people within that joke, within the church in that joke. And so he's sort of presenting that dichotomy and that dual identity sort of thing that we talked about within Bicentennial Nigger. I'm not exactly sure what these video journals are supposed to look like. I think this is my first time doing one, so if I need more or need to elaborate more on anything for the next one, just let me know. But until then, I think that's all I have for today.